Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm excited to have you guys here so we can get started today. My name is Alex. If you haven't met me before, I'm with Mush Love, and you'll hear a little bit about it. But today we're just going to start with a story about how strange risk is kind of framed in our society these days. Because not long ago, I went to her with an event. It was an HR event. She works with a lot of companies. And I was just going to take photos of her. And so somebody asked me how we knew each other. And I told him that she works with me with my company, Mush Love. And he was like, Mush Love, what's that? I told him, well, we grow entheogenic medicines. And I said, have you ever done mushrooms before? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, nah, I'm a pretty risk averse person. Now that seems reasonable on the surface. But here's the thing, he was standing there looking at me with a glass of alcohol in his hand. So I was like, I said to him, I don't know about that, my guy, because you're holding a glass of poison. I was sitting there thinking about all of this. It's how we frame risk, the difference between what's actually culturally normalized versus what is actually risky. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, because in that moment, my brain short circuited a bit, and I was just thinking about all the experiences I had. So that moment wasn't really about alcohol or mushrooms. Like I said, if you look closely, it's about the things that we frame as safe. We don't even question them at all because we've been taught not to question them. We assume that these things that are normal or framed as normal aren't dangerous. Before we even understand them, we then frame other things as dangerous. And that gap between what we see as risky and normal impacts our lives every day. And that's what I want to talk about. So let's talk about if you start paying attention to the substances and what they label as dangerous. Whoops, there goes my thing. Sorry about that. They line up very differently. It's more about familiarity. So let's go to this slide. This is very interesting. If you look around our society today, over 1 in 5 adults are currently medicated on some sort of medication for psychiatric help. Usually it's for depression, anxiety, things like that. So something isn't working because also 1 in 3 people feel lonely. If you think about that, in our culture today, we are more connected than ever before. We have more like ease, luxury, connection, so many things that we have. But if you start to look at this, a pattern starts to emerge. Alcohol is one example, and I pick on alcohol because it's kind of easy to be able to do that because it's everywhere. You can go to a restaurant, you go to a wedding, company retreats, somebody gets promoted, we drink. Somebody gets married, we drink. Somebody has a funeral, we drink. Everything, hard week, it's just embedded into our society to the point where if you say you don't drink, that kind of makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what to do with that a lot of time. Like it's an unspoken rule. But here's the thing about alcohol. It actually dampens your nervous system. It lowers your inhibition. It numbs emotion. But alcohol isn't the only way that we do this. We scroll, we distract ourselves, we stay busy all the time, and we fill every quiet moment with something. And none of these things are inherently bad. What it is that they become constant. And when that happens, they start to do the same thing. They pull us out of our experience of being human. Especially, like I said, if you look at what we talked about, we're more connected than ever in history. But something is, oops, went way fast. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So anyway, the interesting thing is, like I said, people are more lonely than ever, but something seems to be missing because a lot of people that come to me, they say they're going through their life, they're going through the motions, but they're not really sure what it is even that's missing. And I don't think that's because people are broken. I think it's because we've been taught to numb instead of to feel, to distract instead of connect, to suppress instead of heal. And when you do that long enough, you don't just avoid pain, you lose access to joy, to connection, to meaning. And eventually, you start to forget what it feels like to be fully alive. I didn't figure this out. It was actually someone else's work that illuminated this for me. It was Brene Brown. You probably heard of her. And she teaches that you cannot selectively numb emotions. If you numb all the bad things like vulnerability or grief or shame, things that feel bad, you actually numb the light too. You don't have access to joy and gratitude and love and belonging and connection, which is what we're all here for. If you numb the dark, you numb the light. When I first heard that, it landed in me so heavily because life can be hard. Trauma is real, and we want to be able to not feel these things. Especially, I've had a hard life myself. Numbing doesn't look dramatic a lot of times. A lot of times you're just going through your life. You go to work, you answer the emails, you answer the phone. It's actually not very dramatic. You're functioning, but you're not fully inside of your life. And one moment in particular stuck with me. This woman came to me. She was on a lot of medications, stuff for depression, stuff for anxiety, and I want to be really careful here because I'm not anti-medication at all. Sometimes medication is exactly what people need to get from one point to another or to stay here long enough to do the healing. But I also think we need to tell the truth that for some people, these medications give them a different kind of pain because now they become disconnected from their own selves. So this woman that was on these medications came to me and she looked me in the eyes and she said something I will never forget. She said, "I just want myself back." That sentence has stuck with me because it's not the sentence of someone who feels healed. It's the sentence of someone who feels disconnected from their own life force. She didn't say, "I want to be productive or feel better or perform or fit into society." She said, "I want myself back." And I knew exactly what she meant because she's describing a specific kind of numbness that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels haunted, like you're a ghost in your own life. It's like when you know something meaningful is happening, but you can't really connect to it. And I think a lot of people are living like this, not because they're weak, or like I said, because they're broken, but because they're trying to protect themselves from feelings that feel too big, especially in our world, because if you really look at it, you start to see things might need to change. You might need to realign. You might need to grieve. You might need to feel some things that you've been really not wanting to feel for a while. And they don't think that they can get through that. And so that's why we protect ourselves a lot of the time. This is really personal to me because I grew up in a cult. And when you grow up in a cult, the first thing you learn is not to trust yourself, not to trust your instincts, your feelings, that if you feel something isn't right, it's you that isn't right. It's never the thing that isn't right. In the system that I grew up in, there was a very specific belief that if you were inside, you were good, but if you were outside, you had a wicked heart, and that the world was fundamentally full of fundamentally broken and corrupt people. So when you start to live in a world like that, sometimes it can be a real struggle because for me, it went really far again, sorry about that. For me, I did not fit in. All of these rules that they said, they just didn't fit with me. And they told me often that I was rebellious and even that I had a wicked heart. So when I left eventually, and I did leave the cult, it wasn't because I felt free. It was because I believed them. I believed that I had a wicked heart. And I thought the best thing I could do was stop hurting myself in them and leave. And when I left, I did a lot of the things that people do. I used alcohol. I avoided my pain. I tried to numb. I did not want to look at everything I had been through, that's for sure. But it only helped to a certain extent, and really not at all, because I wasn't healing. So something unexpected happened after that. I was working with a guy who had cannabis, and it was not legal at the time, but he said, "I think this might help you." So he came over, and I was like, wow, this is a wonder. I had anxiety. I couldn't eat. I had nausea all the time, and it helped with that so much. And then the next time, a few times later when he came, he brought the person that he got his cannabis from, and I was telling him my story. And he said, "I think you need mushrooms." He literally shoved some across the table. I was like, all right. And I thought in myself, because these were all looked at as wicked things where I came from. They were evil. And I thought, well, if I have a wicked heart, what do I got to lose? So I was like, all right, I'm gonna do this then. And so it's a long story about how it even happened, but my brother was with me at the time, and it's a whole story in itself, like I said, but we got the crackers and peanut butter, we put the mushrooms on top, bean bags and blankets, and we were like, all right, we're going on a journey. We dove in. And the first, it started kind of with the giggles, and then it starts going in waves depending on the strain. And for us, it was like that. It was a very wavy strain. We were in and out, and something unexpected happened. I started feeling love. I felt loved. For the first time I could remember, I didn't feel unworthy. I didn't feel like I had a wicked heart. I didn't feel broken. And then something else started happening. I had this deep knowing that my brother wouldn't be in my life much longer. It was really, really meaningful, though. It didn't feel tragic, because in this moment with my brother, we were laughing and we were sharing love. And it hit me really deeply that love would never not exist again. It was there, and I could carry it with me no matter what forever. And then something even further started to hit me, that if I was feeling all of this love, that meant something more. And then the mushrooms started talking to me, and they said, "You're not a human being with a wicked heart. You're a human being with love, and so is everyone else." That started to change everything for me, because what I experienced didn't feel like escaping reality. It was connecting me back to myself. For the first time, I felt like parts of myself that had been locked away suddenly were available again. I felt like I had access to new perspectives and new insights. And let me be clear, it was not even remotely overnight that this stuff started happening, but it gave me something to aim for. It was the first time I ever felt at any point like I was worthy, and I wanted to feel that more. So it gave me something. And over time, I started learning more about these medicines. One of the big things that researchers talk about is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is just the brain's ability to rewire, to change, to create new pathways instead of being stuck in old ones. And this matters a lot when we talk about trauma or healing, because trauma tends to get us stuck in patterns of thought, patterns of fear, self-belief. If you spend years believing you're unworthy or had a wicked heart like I did, your brain starts to believe that, and it starts to wear paths in it that are very deep, and it gets very good at reinforcing that belief. If you spend years living in fear, your brain's going to stay on high alert all the time. But as it does that, it wears patterns like a forest, and that's all you think you have. But psychedelics, they do something else fascinating. They temporarily loosen those patterns, and it's like snow falling in that forest where all those paths were. Now you don't even know where the paths were, and you can kind of go wherever you want. You're above everything. And that is really important, like I said, when you're in trauma, because you can process these old experiences. Your brain becomes more flexible for this period of time, and it means that you can have new insights and be open to changes. It does it in not in a scary way. It makes you feel like you're more in the moment. It gives you actually more time. And sometimes it even does the thing like with my brother. I had this knowing that he wouldn't be there in the future, and he wasn't. A short time later, he left. It's kind of amazing how mushrooms can put you outside of the time, because that space, that it's wonderful. That's where all that magic can happen, and that brain rewiring that we get to do. Now, one thing that's important to understand, that this does exist on a spectrum, from microdoses, like what you can take 4 days a week, but even on that small level, from even like 50 milligrams, your brain has a neuroplasticity and can have rewiring. At moderate doses, it boosts it up. And then if you do like a heroic journey, that neuroplasticity can last up to 21 days, which is pretty amazing that you get to have that in your life for an extended period of time. It's really, really profound, things that it can give to us. But once I started understanding all of this, I started seeing that the conversation about risk is different than we might have thought. Because when people say psychedelics are risky, a lot of time what they're actually saying is that feeling deeply can be risky. But avoiding your own life, that has risks too. One of the things I've noticed over the years working with people is that the stories that are told about medicines often matter more than the medicines themselves. Fear spreads very easily, especially when it's based on incomplete information. And I saw a really clear example of this recently with someone who I know who's been going through some immune issues. Now, when you watch someone go through things like that you care about, it's hard to watch sometimes. So I started thinking about something that has helped me. I've had immune issues. If you've ever heard of Kambo, which is the secretion of a frog, It's a medicine from the Amazonian. What they do is they burn a little bit of your skin and then they put this mucus on your skin. And it's kind of amazing in that it helps your body replace every peptide. Now, I wouldn't also say that it's a comfortable experience. It's quite uncomfortable in some ways. Your heart races. But here's the thing, with a good practitioner, there's different doses, microdosing, heroic doses, all these different things. So I told my friend about this, and she did what a lot of people do when they hear about something, and she went online and started researching it. Well, online, there's a bunch of horror stories because it's not about these nuances and knowing about a good practitioner. She even went to her doctor and started worrying about all of this, and she came back to me spooked, and she's like, I'm never doing that. Now, I would never want to make somebody do anything because bodies are complex and healing is complex and everybody's different. But here's the thing that made me pause. This friend of mine had done cocaine recently. She did MDMA often, recreationally, other substances too, hard things. And she hadn't done research about those. Why? Because they were culturally framed as normal. Normal partying, normal fun, normal experimentation. And when it came to that thing that really could heal her body, it was the fear that really came in and pushed it away from her. And I don't say this to judge her because she's actually a really intelligent, kind, loving, amazing human being. But I say it to illustrate that even when somebody comes to something with you who knows about it, fear can overwhelm in our society so much. So our perception of risk is more about what's culturally normal than what's even really safe when it comes to harm. And this is when everything we talk about starts to come together. Because when you look at all of it side by side, the data, the lived experience, the stories we're told, this conversation about risk we realize it's pointed in the wrong direction. It says often, is this substance risky? But that's not the important question. The important question is, does it help you disconnect from your life or does it help you reconnect with it? Because those are two very different paths and they lead to two very different outcomes. Numbing is about turning things down, turning down the pain, turning down the fear, turning down your feelings, your discomfort. But when you turn those down and the pain and all of that, you lose your depth, you lose the connection, you lose the parts of life that actually make it meaningful. And over time, that creates a very specific kind of experience. You can go to work, you can show up, you can do everything you're supposed to do, but you're not really feeling your life. You're moving through it. And it might look like on the surface everything's fine, but there's a cost to that. Because a life you can't fully feel is a life you can't fully live. Healing works differently, though. Healing doesn't turn things off. It actually opens you back up. Sometimes gently, sometimes intensely, but the direction is different. Instead of moving you away from yourself, it brings you back. My favorite quote is, do you remember who you were before the world told you who to be? This is what that all comes back to. It brings you back to your body, your emotions, your self. And yes, that can be uncomfortable because feeling means you might have to face some of the things that you've been through, just like I did. Grief and fear and the truth about the things that you've been through. But it also means that something else becomes available to you. Connection and presence and meaning and love as who you actually are. That is so worthy. It's the best thing you can do in your life. And what's interesting is when researchers look at it, they actually see this reflected in our brain as well when we make these changes with psychedelics. So it's pretty amazing that all of these things that people tell us are risky, it's not always true. It can help us actually have space to feel and stop disconnecting from ourselves. So the real question that you want to ask is, what kind of life is this leading me towards? The substances in my life. And I want to thank you for letting me share some of these stories with you. I'm Alex Embry. I'm from Mush Love. I do a few other things as well. You can look up some of my websites and things like that. But I'm someone who, more than anything, has really tried to understand what it means to come back to myself. And I want that for every person in the world too. And what I've seen over and over again is this conversation about what is risky and numbing versus healing, we can actually change it. Because what we call normal right now is actually meant to disconnect us. And I want us to what be normal to be healing and reconnecting back to who we actually are. Because across psychedelics, you see this pattern. It brings you back. Different compounds, different traditions, but a similar experience. Back to connection, back to yourself. And it, again, I say this a lot, it doesn't mean the path is always easy. But I think we're ready. I think that we're ready for something new, for something different. And whether we stay disconnected from ourselves or choose to come back, that's up to us. So I keep thinking back from that moment in the beginning with the guy with the glass of alcohol telling me he was risk averse. And I don't think that was about him at all. I think that was about all of us so that we can have the moment and take the time to decide in our life what we think, and we can pay attention to what brings us closer to ourselves. Because here's the thing, you're still there underneath, and you always have been. So all we need is for you to come back out, because the greatest gift in the world is for each of us to show who we are. Thank you, everybody. Much love. If you have questions, we have just a couple minutes. I'd like to save some time for that. Yes. My favorite strain of mushrooms? I love this. Right now, it's Stargazer, because if you came to my talk yesterday, you know that mushrooms talk to me in my vibrationally, and so this mushroom is the only one I've ever had that's a feminine energy. And one of the other things I didn't put in the talk is I'm also trans. And so being raised in a woman's body, being seen as a woman, and then having the experience of being seen as a man. I'm actually non-binary. I'm neither, or both, depending on how you look at it. Um, but being seen as both and being able to be both is very interesting, because I've been in both rooms, and you know this about me. So the feminine energy is so powerful. Being raised as a woman, women are beautiful. They're phenomenal. They're amazing. The range of emotion that women have is completely different than the range of men. When I started being on testosterone, I was like, whoa, this is different. It really narrows you down. It really narrows you down. There's less emotions, and a lot of them fall under anger, and you got to figure out what that means. So so Stargazer kind of brings back that spectrum of emotions, which I really appreciate as someone that is now on testosterone and living that sort of life. Because for me, again, this brings us back to the vulnerability and back to ourselves. No one person, whether you're a cis or hetero person, is one thing. We all are all of it, and we need to honor all of that. And so there's a lot of strains that are gender neutral or masculine, but she's the only one I've ever had that's feminine. And everybody that has her, you've had her. she's just special, and I think that is going to be something that starts to give us back to ourselves as well, especially. And a lot of the dudes, I love that you're all nodding your heads, because this makes it safe to be able to share this experience. Because when a lot of dude experiences, even there's no real vulnerability within them. When I was first transitioning, I went to therapy a lot. You have to go to therapy to be able to get your letters and all that. And I was telling my therapist this experience about now being seen as a dude and how different it was. And she said the first time her husband and her had a get together, her husband's friend from college came in, and he said the first words that came out of his mouth were, "Yo, dude, you're gay as fuck," to his friend, and he like screamed it across the room. And so my friend's a therapist. She was a therapist. She's my friend now, and she said to me, I had to go to my husband and be like, "We need to get this guy. We need to go have a thing." And so they had a conversation, and what he meant by "dude, you're gay as fuck" is, look how happy you are, look how domesticated you are, look at your family, you bought a home. But he had to say "you're gay as fuck" in order to say that. That is not vulnerable. That is not connecting. And that is how men, a lot of times, are forced to connect. And it's a very different experience than women. And having had both of them in my life, I know the difference. And I know that for a lot of dudes, there's another experience that I had. The first time I had an argument with a guy, the next time I was going to go talk to him, I was like, all right, I'm going to talk this out. And the other guy told me, no, you argue once, it's done, and that's it. And I was like, fuck no, it's not. We got to talk this out. We got to figure out our feelings. We got to figure out what's going on with all of this. He's like, that's not how dudes do it. And I'm like, y'all are missing out, because there was no closure. There was no facilitation of our feelings. This is not going to work for me. So seeing both sides is really interesting as a trans person. And these mushrooms, I think, are going to give us back the vulnerability. So dudes don't have to say you're gay as fuck and all of that, because to be honest with you, I've had some beautiful, wonderful, vulnerable conversations with men, and they've been able to open up to me and in this safe place. And I think they are also longing for that and the lack of numbing, because I think that is also a form of numbing these higher level of communications that I don't understand still. It's very nuanced. So that's a good question. It was way longer answer than I planned on. Yes. Yeah. It's an amazing, amazing tool. So I was raised, as they said, in a cult, but my mom had 5 immune diseases. So she was in and out of hospitals my whole life. And they told me young, you're probably going to have some immune stuff. And I did. I had, they couldn't always diagnose it, but it was somewhere between like chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. It was diagnosed on my thing. I started taking Kambo, and I don't have any of that anymore, because it starts to replace peptides, it starts to boost your immune system. And I only ever do microdoses. I don't ever do more than what they call 1 dot, which is 1 burn, and a small dose. And because what it does is it helps boost your immune system. Like I said, it's not comfortable. It's about 15 minutes. Your heart feels like it's going to beat out of your chest, but it's literally flushing your system of any toxins. Oftentimes, if you have not eaten well, you will have to eject that out of one end or the other. Like there is a lot of that going on, but you feel so energized and amazing and healthy and well, to the point where I live with a couple other people. They've gotten COVID, bad flu. I don't get any of it. It just goes right past me. So, but before, if anybody looked at me and they had something, I'd get it. I was on prednisone at least 4 or 5 times a year because it was trying to suppress my immune system to get back. I have not been on prednisone for years now, all since doing Kambo. So it's amazing for me. Any other questions? Awesome. We're right on time. Thank you so much for coming. I'd love to connect with anybody. Have a good one.